The holy grail of basketball endorsements is getting a signature shoe line. On top of getting an original sneaker just how they want, players with signature lines get royalties from every sale, which can be a massive moneymaker. When looking around the league, most of the top stars have their own lines, and have been releasing new models annually for quite some time. While we've been treated to some classics over the years, coming out with something new and fresh every year is bound to result in some duds. Today, we're going to take a look at the biggest signature shoe lines in the basketball industry and pick the worst model that each of them came out with. To start, we're going to take a look at Paul George. On a quick side note, it's rumored that his PG line has been discontinued in favor of the upcoming Ja Morant and Devin Booker lines. This would be super disappointing because I've really liked his shoes over the years, especially for the cheaper price point. Out of his overall solid series, the PG4 stands out like a sore thumb. What I like about George's shoes is that they usually don't try and do too much, but Nike completely went away from that with this design. There was this strange zipper that seemed to take inspiration from the Jordan 28, but at least on that shoe, there was a finished concept built around the zipper. But on the PG4, it just seems unnecessary. And then on top of that, the super flat and thick midsole looks kind of off to me. I don't really have too much to say about this one. It's not a horrible shoe, but it's the only one from his line that I'm not really a fan of. I didn't realize that Damian Lillard has had 8 shoes with Adidas, probably because the majority of them are pretty forgettable. Every now and then they come out with something nice, most notably the Dame 4. After that shoe, I was pretty excited to see what they would do with the Dame 5, and oh my goodness did they let me all the way down. The whole collar around the top of the ankle does not look like it belongs on a basketball shoe. And speaking of things that don't belong, what the f is this panel on the side? I can't stand when these designers deliberately add something to block something else. So when this panel here is slapped on the side of the shoe and cuts off the Adidas logo, it just looks like they threw some materials together and released the shoe without even looking it over. Like, doesn't Adidas want people to see their logo? Why would they want to block what is probably the most important part of the shoe for them? I really hope we don't see this happen again going forward. Moving on to another superstar who recently had his Nike line discontinued, Kyrie Irving has had one of, if not the most popular signature line since it debuted back in 2014. Although I've criticized his shoes in the past for a lack of innovation, overall, I've really enjoyed his line and have played in multiple shoes of his. Since pretty much all of his shoes are so similar, it's hard to choose one over the other as worse than the rest, but I'm gonna have to go with his final official release with Nike, the Kyrie Infinity, as the worst in the entire line. This was the shoe that Kyrie infamously called trash ahead of its release, and likely played a big reason in him being dropped by the company. I wouldn't say these are trash by any means, but they are definitely a step below what has otherwise been a super consistent line. In terms of the silhouette, I don't like how this area right here is such a jagged cut between the two sections of the shoe. On top of that, the materials on this shoe just look cheaper compared to other models. But those are pretty nitpicky critiques. My biggest gripe with the Kyrie Infinity was the horrible colorways. All of the other models in the Kyrie line had a bunch of different colorways that almost always had good blocking. Well, there was something simple that featured one predominant color or something more detailed, the other models almost always did it in a tasteful way. But with his final shoe, I feel like they don't get either quite right. And I think it ultimately comes down to there being too many distinct sections of the shoe. With a strap under the logo, 2 sections for the midsole, and another strap under the upper that already has an overlay, it's difficult for the shoe to highlight all of these distinct parts and make it visually pleasing at the same time. Which is why the simple black and white colorways fall flat, as well as the other louder designs. For James Harden, the Volume 5 stands out as the worst shoe in his line, even though it looks exceptionally nice for a basketball shoe in my opinion. Over the last few years, I've played in the Volume 2, 4, and 6, and I've really enjoyed my experience with all of them. In between the 4 and 6, we were all coming out of quarantine in New York, and the courts were just starting to open up again. I was planning on picking up the newest pair in what has been an awesome line thus far, but then I saw the reviews for the Volume 5, which thankfully kept me away from these. It's a shame because I really do like how the shoe looks. One of my biggest gripes with today's basketball shoes is how so many of them look like space sneakers for the sake of maximizing performance. This shoe definitely took that into consideration, as it looks more like a regular training shoe that you'd wear to the gym as opposed to the basketball court, but its horrible performance ultimately kept me from ever getting a chance to give these a shot. And even though the rest of his signature line has some ups and downs, none of them are particularly ugly looking, and they all seem to perform way better than this one. So the Volume 5 is the one that takes the cake as the worst. But let me know in the comments what you guys think of Harden's new shoe, the Volume 7. If you ask me, I think they did an awesome job with this, and I'm probably going to pick up a pair in the near future. Kevin Durant's line is pretty hard to judge because of the transition it underwent. When the KD1 first released way back in 2009, Durant said he wanted it to be a budget shoe that was more accessible. So his first signature model retailed at just $88, and you can tell because this is by far the worst shoe in his signature line. If you took this strange and small KD branding off the collar of the shoe, this would look like any other typical cheap basketball sneaker that you would find at Modell's in the late 2000s. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but from this point on, his shoes have steadily risen in price, and so has their overall look and quality. So in a vacuum, I'd have to choose the KD1, but I would actually go with the KD7 as his worst shoe aside from the outlier of his first model. This has always felt like a shitty sequel to the KD6, which was amazing. His 6th shoe was so unorthodox in its design as it looked more like a soccer cleat than a basketball shoe, and everybody loved how unique they looked. So when they basically copy and pasted the KD6 and made some small changes to make it look more like a typical basketball shoe, it felt like Nike was erasing all of the progress they made the year prior. And on top of that, these were actually $20 more expensive than the KD6. So the step back in design and increase in price just always left a bitter taste in my mouth. Back in 2015 and 16, Stephen Curry was taking over the league, becoming one of the most iconic figures in all of sports. On top of his budding superstardom, the first 2 editions of his signature shoes with Under Armour had amazing sales. So much so that Curry's shoes were reportedly selling just as well as other established sneaker giants like LeBron and KD. But unfortunately for Under Armour, all of this momentum came to a screeching halt with the Curry 3. It all started in the 2016 finals. In the middle of the series, Under Armour revealed an all-white edition of the Curry 2 Low that was universally panned across the internet. Steph then wore them during a team practice a few days later, only causing people to trash the shoes even more. Even though they ironically sold really well, the Curry line seemed to have lost its cool factor from this point on. This was the first time any Curry shoes had a negative reputation. Another kick-ass model like the Curry 1 or 2 would have likely turned the ship around, but then Under Armour made the fatal mistake of releasing the Curry 3 to kill off any hype that the Curry line had. In a time where most people were opting for lower cut shoes, Under Armour struck gold by creating a high top design that both met the needs of Steph's fragile ankles and looked visually appealing as well. But for the Curry 3, they abandoned that look and went for a boxy mid-cut design. The first 2 editions of his line were so slender and sleek, while this one was just bulky and awkward. On top of that, they're just flat out boring to look at. There aren't really any design elements that jump at you. They're just kind of there. The Curry 3 unsurprisingly sold poorly and actually put Under Armour in a tough spot because they are banking on it selling even better than the Curry 1 and 2. Since this disaster of a release, the Curry line has redeemed itself with some really awesome shoes over the years, but the failure of the Curry 3 eliminated any chance of Steph becoming a true sneaker juggernaut like LeBron and Jordan. For the first time in about a decade, LeBron James has a sneaker that's cool again. His newest shoe, the LeBron 20, is universally acclaimed by fans and critics everywhere. I'm happy for him because ever since the LeBron 12, Nike has been giving this man trash sneakers to play in almost every single year. Aside from the 15 and 16, which were decent in my opinion, none of his signature models have widespread consumer appeal. All of them were built like they were exclusively made for someone who was 6'8", 250. And I know it is a signature shoe, so it's supposed to cater to their needs, but the shoes really just did not have much of a use for people who weren't built like LeBron. On top of that, they would always be trying to do way too much with these designs, and would almost always end up looking ugly. His line reached an all-time low with the LeBron 19. As we all know, LeBron recently starred in Space Jam 2, and if we look back at the original, Michael Jordan wore the iconic Space Jam 11s for the film, and they're one of the most sought-after basketball sneakers ever. But LeBron couldn't live up to the standards set by Mike, as the sneakers that he wore during the sequel were a flop just like the movie, with 2 big air bubbles in both the heel and forefoot, as well as a super high collar around the ankle, and a tongue that basically came up to your shin. The shoe is bulkier than a Timberland boot. And when looking at the overall design, the upper is covered in some plastic material, and there's also airbags on the tongue and the Nike logo. To top it all off, it seems like Nike tried to make this shoe appeal to little kids as much as possible to go hand in hand with the movie, because they made the brightest, most obnoxious colorways possible. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'd be playing pickup at my local gyms, I never saw anyone hooping in the LeBron 19. Even LeBron himself opted to wear the LeBron Ambassador 13, a budget shoe of his only available in China, over the flagship LeBron 19. The very person who the shoes were made for opted to wear something else instead. I think that says all that needs to be said about this shoe. But I do think there was some good that came out of this horrendous model. After years of underwhelming releases for the most famous basketball player in the world, Nike went back to the drawing board and simplified things with the LeBron 20. There's no crazy design or out of this world tech, just a nice looking, well-rounded basketball shoe that looks like something humans would actually wear. It's probably the first universally loved LeBron since the 10 or 11, and I hope it begins a trend of simpler silhouettes going forward. And that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what your least favorite signature basketball shoe is in the comments, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys next time.